debate. Today, we're diving into something pretty complex: ideological subversion. Basically, how a nation's whole view of reality can be deliberately changed. The big question we're tackling is, how much do powerful groups use psychology, societal splits, and reactions to major events, like, say, acts of political violence, to, control things and shape what people think? And what does that mean long-term for how we're governed and in our own autonomy? Our discussion is based on some detailed source material about how influence works historically and now. I'll be arguing that this kind of subversion is often a very deliberate, step-by-step strategy designed to break down society for control, especially after a crisis.
And I'll be arguing that, subversion happens, but the control mechanisms often aren't quite so centralized. It's more about skillfully exploiting vulnerabilities that are already there in society, and basic human psychology. And of course, modern technology just throws fuel on that fire, creating this widespread, often unseen influence that's maybe less about a grand top-down plan and more about, sophisticated exploitation.
Okay, so my position, and this draws a lot from what the former KGB defector Yuri Bezmenov talked about, is that ideological subversion is this meticulously planned, four-stage psychological warfare game. It's designed to dismantle a nation from the inside out. It kicks off with demoralization, and this takes a long time, maybe 15, 20 years, where the core values get chipped away, making people, as he put it, unable to assess true information.
Right. And this systemic breakdown paves the way for destabilization. That's shorter, like 2 to 5 years. This is where individuals Bezmenov called sleepers, these could be agents or just heavily influenced people, start stirring up conflict, creating chaos. And eventually this all rushes towards a crisis, a really intense period, maybe just 6 weeks, where society feels like it's collapsing and everyone's desperately looking for a savior. This whole framework, it's laid out in our sources. It really points to a deliberate plan to achieve conquest without a single shot being fired, and it has specific targets: religion, education, law enforcement, even pushing divisive ideas about equality. Bezmenov basically shows the most effective takeover isn't military, it's this slow psychological rot from within.
Bezmenov's stages certainly give a vivid picture of societal breakdown. I get that. But I'm just not fully convinced the main driver is always some singular, external, orchestrated plot. My take is that powerful groups, maybe what you could call an invisible government, influential circles working behind the scenes, they get really good at exploiting the psychological buttons in the societal cracks that already exist. Edward Bernays, way back, wrote about manipulating this unseen mechanism of society, right? Showing how you can appeal to unconscious desires, stir up tribalism using divide and conquer tactics, and populations just become incredibly susceptible.
Right.
And today, technology just pours gasoline on that. This whole race for our attention, the algorithms built to push outrage, it fragments society so deeply that, honestly, rational discussion becomes extremely unlikely. And in that kind of atmosphere, a call for safety can easily morph into demands for more control, more power, more ICE in cities, and more oppression in the name of safety. We've seen that discussed in relation to what the Ezra Klein show termed an authoritarian consolidation stage, where crises aren't just about finding one savior, but about locking down institutional power. So maybe it's less about planting new fears and more about skillfully fanning the flames of our, deep-seated anxieties and tribal instincts.
Okay, let's get into the core of it then. The agency and intent. Is it deliberate demolition or exploiting existing weak spots? My stance is firm. This isn't accidental decay, it's designed. Bezmenov's stages aren't just descriptions. They're almost like blueprints. Take demoralization again. It involves specific, long-term tactics aimed at eroding basic moral values and principles. That means things like systematically making fun of religion, shifting education away from practical, critical thinking, replacing traditional community structures with artificially, bureaucratically controlled bodies, and deliberately making people mistrust those supposed to protect them, like mistrust of the people who's supposed to protect you and enforce law and order. This feels like an active campaign, doesn't it, to undermine the foundations?
And then destabilization. That phase directly uses these sleepers, people who've been maybe compromised or are actual agents, cultivated sometimes for decades. They spring to action, creating these antagonistic clashes, he said, sometimes militantly, sometimes with firearms, pitting groups against each other, like black against white, yellows against green. That doesn't sound like just stumbling onto existing divisions. That sounds like actively creating and blowing them wide open through a planned subversion. How can you look at those details and say there's no clear orchestrating intent behind it?
Okay, look, I approach it from a slightly different angle. I absolutely agree the results look planned, very much so. But the effectiveness of that divide and conquer strategy, and Machiavelli pointed this out centuries ago, right? It works because there are vulnerabilities to exploit. His point was that a population united is always stronger than those who rule over it. That implies the cracks, the potential divisions are often already there.
Well, sure, but
And Bernays, he really dug into the psychology of it. He observed that groups naturally see their own standards ultimate and indisputable, and tend to just dismiss all contrary or different standards as indefensible. That's just kind of baseline human group behavior, which makes genuine rational debate across groups inherently tough from the get-go. So yes, powerful entities definitely promote these identifications that divide the population: race, class, religion, gender, politics, you name it. But the reason it's so effective is because we seem hardwired for a degree of tribalism. Weakening society this way distracts everyone from the invisible government pulling strings in the background. So it's not necessarily about outside agents injecting brand new ideologies, maybe. It could just as easily be about internal forces expertly leveraging these deep-seated human tendencies, this inherent fragility in any diverse society.
It feels more like a fundamental exploitation of human nature, not just an external attack plan.
But the speed and totality of the collapse Bezmenov describes, especially in that crisis phase, that suggests something more than just exploiting what's already there. It points towards an engineered chaos, deliberately pushing a country to the point where legitimate power structures collapse. And then the population at large is looking for a savior, a strong man, a leader, a messiah. Think about the intense fear, the demand for order that can erupt after something shocking, like the recent tragic shooting of Charlie Kirk. I know there's now a suspect in custody, but the event itself. Our source material points out that physical attacks lead to a corresponding increase of trust in political leaders and submission to them. And this happens whether the leaders knew about it, allowed it, or even orchestrated it. The effect can be the same. This dynamic allows a specific figure or their whole ideology to be framed as the only one who can protect people. It consolidates loyalty. It can even help ensure political victory because they embody that desperate need for security. We've seen hints of this historically, right? Officials who survive assassination attempts sometimes gain this surge of public support. They're seen as resilient, maybe destined to lead through the turmoil. It doesn't feel random. It feels like a predictable outcome if you know how to manipulate the psychology after engineered or even just opportunistically used violence.
I agree. Fear is incredibly powerful. One of the most powerful human emotions, right? It shuts down rational thought, makes people easily manipulated, no question. But I guess I question if it always leads down that specific, neat path to one singular savior figure. My concern is more about a broader, systemic erosion of rationality in a population that's already been demoralized. And that erosion then allows for more widespread institutional control, not just one person rising up. For me, the focus shifts to how our actual information environment gets manipulated to achieve this. Think about false flag operations, attacks made to look like they were done by one group but secretly planned by another. They show just how easily public perception gets twisted in a crisis because, let's face it, people will, for the most part, believe what they are told, especially when emotions are running high.
Okay. And the media often acts like a giant echo chamber, amplifying certain narratives. Social media algorithms, they're literally designed to prioritize outrage because it grabs attention. It all accelerates this process, fragmenting our shared sense of reality. The Ezra Klein show, They discuss this idea of an authoritarian consolidation stage, where governments use events, including violence, to centralize power and crack down on dissent. We saw discussions around deploying the National Guard during unrest or raids by masked ICE agents, refusing to reveal their faces. These actions aren't necessarily about boosting one's savior, but about entrenching state power, punishing enemies, all justified by the need for safety. This connects directly back to that worry about more ICE in cities and more oppression in the name of safety, potentially following something like Kirk's death. It suggests maybe a broader institutional power grab using the crisis, rather than just elevating one charismatic leader.
That's a fair point about institutional leverage, but I think it still points back to deliberate intent behind the operations themselves. Let's look at covert ops, psychological warfare, and now digital control. History gives us clear examples of governments secretly manipulating their own populations, even pushing violence. COINTELPRO, the FBI program. I mean, they didn't just watch activists. The record shows they were infiltrating activist groups, even pushing them towards violence to discredit them. That's direct use of secret agents to stir up trouble for political goals. Or Project MKUltra, the CIA's mind control program, trying to control and even reprogram people's minds, creating so-called Manchurian candidates with drugs and hypnosis, replacing true memories with false memories. These weren't just background trends. They were calculated, secret operations designed to create chaos for control. And fast forward to today, look at the tech. Gorgon stare, this idea of persistent aerial surveillance, an unblinking eye watching entire cities, and AI systems like Palantir, with its predictive capabilities to anticipate unrest. Doesn't this trajectory suggest a move towards total proactive control, always justified by the need for safety after the latest incident? It feels like a continuous, intentional push, not just taking advantage of things as they happen.
Yeah, those historical examples like COINTELPRO, MKUltra, they are deeply disturbing, absolutely. Compelling evidence of direct, nefarious action. But I think the modern situation adds this layer of subtlety, maybe, pervasiveness, that we really need to unpack. It might move beyond just agents causing chaos in the streets. Take the Paul Benowitz case. That's a chilling example of a different kind. The Air Force intelligence basically ran an incredibly insidious disinformation campaign against him. They fed him false stories, even beamed fake alien transmissions right into his house. Why? To distract him from real secrets he was getting close to, and importantly, to make anyone seriously interested in UFOs look ridiculous. It drove him to a breakdown. That wasn't about overt violence, it was reality hacking, consciously messing with someone's perception of reality.
Reality hacking.
Exactly. And in our digital world, that kind of manipulation can be scaled up massively. Tech companies, in their constant race for our attention, they've become a sort of invisible government. You have like 100 engineers shaping our curated existence online. This whole system means anyone with the resources can precisely target a lie directly to the people who are most susceptible. Think about that. It leads to this slow, steady erosion of personal autonomy, of critical thinking. It also feeds into this manufactured loneliness, which further breaks down community ties, leaving people feeling isolated, maybe too tired to question, too distracted to resist. So while your examples highlight direct agency actions, I see this broader, maybe more insidious mechanism today that uses technology to achieve a similar, maybe even greater level of control, often without leaving fingerprints.
Well, our discussion today really underscores, I think, that ideological subversion, whether it's meticulously planned by outside forces or expertly leveraged by internal ones, is a serious ongoing threat to democratic societies. The stages Bezmenov described, from chipping away at values and demoralization, right through to exploiting crisis and violence, they demonstrably create conditions where people demand strong leaders and accept more state control. Understanding these patterns is just crucial, especially when we see contemporary events like political violence and realize how these patterns could easily repeat, leading us into times of much greater state power, all justified by security.
Indeed. And I think this conversation highlights just how deeply psychological manipulation and the strategic use of division are woven into shaping our reality. The threat of overt subversion, the kind Bezmenov warned about, it's real. But we also have to critically look at the pervasive, often invisible control that works through fear, through media narratives, through technology, this constant chipping away at rational thought, this fragmentation of community. It leaves us incredibly vulnerable to stories that promise safety, but ultimately cost us our autonomy, our agency. The task, I guess, is always to analyze the different perspectives, look hard at the evidence from all sides, like we've tried to do with our material today, and really forge our own understanding, resisting those easy, simple answers to very complex problems.